Vanessa, 27. I never imagined that a quiet family barbecue would spiral into the darkest chapter of our lives. But that was the day everything began to unravel. I remember the way the sky looked that evening in Dallas. Clear, wide, almost too peaceful for what was coming. My sister Melissa showed up late, wearing a loose floral hoodie, sunglasses even though the sun had just set, and that nervous energy she always tried to pass off as being tired from work. She was never one for family events, but when she did show up, she tried hard to fake normal. That night, I noticed something odd. Melissa had gotten bigger, not just weight gain. I mean, her midsection looked noticeably rounded. To put it bluntly, she looked pregnant, but no one said anything. I didn't either. Different people go through different things, and I've seen enough trauma and shame in women to know that confronting someone like that at a barbecue is a mistake. But something felt off. It was not just how her stomach looked, it was how only her stomach looked like that. Her face was still narrow, her arms the same. This wasn't ordinary weight gain. Still, I said nothing. I watched her sit with our cousins, pretending everything was fine, sipping lemonade with her hand casually resting over her belly, like she was already protecting something. 3 months later, we all gathered again, this time for Dad's birthday at a steakhouse in San Antonio. When Melissa walked in, it was like a silence fell across the whole room. The bump was no longer deniable. Her sweatshirt couldn't hide it anymore, and her walk had changed. Slow, deliberate, careful. I noticed first, but then our mother did too. My Uncle Greg turned away awkwardly, and our Aunt Marlene whispered something to her husband. The silence at the table dragged longer than it should have, until finally someone asked, half-jokingly, if she wanted to tell us something. Melissa just smiled stiffly and said that she had been under a lot of stress lately. She said her doctor put her on hormone medication for anxiety, and that one of the side effects was rapid abdominal weight gain. She said it while cutting into a piece of grilled chicken like this wasn't an absurd thing to say. I sat frozen. I have seen people gain weight due to medication, but not only in one isolated area. The way she was carrying herself, the way she instinctively placed a hand over her stomach every time she got up or sat down. It wasn't stress or pills. She was hiding something. But everyone else accepted her story. Mom even nodded sympathetically and told her to take care of herself. I did not say a word. I was watching her too closely to believe anything she said. And somewhere deep inside, I started to feel a cold knot forming in my chest. Something was terribly wrong. 2 more months passed, and Melissa finally stopped hiding. When she came to the next family dinner, this time at our cousin Kayla's apartment in Austin, she looked 9 months in. She wore a long knit dress that clung to her shape like she had stopped trying to conceal the inevitable. No more baggy clothes, no more sunglasses. Her hair was brushed neatly, her makeup done, and she had that heavy tiredness on her face that pregnant women get when sleep becomes a luxury. The room turned to ice. No one knew what to say, but everyone knew that every previous excuse had been a lie. She was clearly pregnant, and she had lied for 8 months about it. My father was the one who finally broke the silence. He asked her if there was anything she wanted to explain. Melissa's expression faltered. She stared at her plate and said that she was sorry for lying. She confessed that she had been terrified, that she didn't know how to say anything because the truth would destroy the family. My mother looked sick, but she tried to stay calm. She asked who the father was. Melissa hesitated. Then her voice cracked, and what she said next shattered the entire night into chaos. She said it happened at our family cabin in Arkansas. During that weekend we all spent there for 4th of July. She said it happened after most of us had gone to bed, that she had stayed outside by the fire pit longer than she should have, and that someone came to talk to her. That someone, she said, was our mother's brother, Uncle Ray. Everything stopped. Mom's wine glass slipped from her hand and shattered on the tile. My dad just stared, mouth open, lips twitching like he wanted to deny hearing what he just heard. And my entire body locked up. I stared at my sister's swollen belly, then at her face, then at the way she refused to make eye contact with any of us. I tried to breathe, but it felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. Mom collapsed. I will never forget the sound her head made when it hit the hardwood floor. Dad lunged forward to help her while yelling at Melissa, who was now sobbing, saying she never wanted to ruin everything, that she thought if she kept it a secret, it would go away. But it didn't. The truth had a way of clawing out, no matter how deep she tried to bury it. My aunt screamed. Uncle Ray wasn't there that night, but his name was like a ghost hanging in the air. I remember standing up, grabbing my coat, and walking outside into the cool night just to feel like I still existed. My hands were shaking. All I could hear was Melissa's voice echoing over and over in my head, confessing that she was carrying the child of our mother's brother, that she had kept this inside her, hidden behind lies about stress and pills and bloating, and that all of us for months had been eating dinners, sharing holidays, laughing over birthday cakes, while this horror was growing silently among us. That was the night everything in our family split into a before and after. No one could look each other in the eye. No one could go back to the way things were. Melissa's confession was like a nail through the center of the table, holding down every ugly secret we had ever tried to ignore. And all I could think about was how truth has weight. And when you hide it, it doesn't disappear. It just grows. Until it is too big to hide under any sweater, too monstrous to call just stress, too horrifying to be forgiven. Update 1. The days after that night blurred together into something heavy and unreal, like the world had tilted and never fully settled back into place. Our family stopped functioning the way families are supposed to. Meals went untouched, phones rang without answers, and every room in our house felt charged with anger that had nowhere to go. My mother barely spoke after she woke up in the hospital. My father, on the other hand, was burning from the inside out. I had never seen him like that before, not even when he lost his job years ago or when his own father passed away. This was different. This was rage mixed with shame, with guilt, with the unbearable realization that danger had been sitting at our family table for years. Within days, my parents decided they were not going to sit still and let this rot quietly. They drove straight to my mother's brother's house in Fort Worth. I went with them, even though every instinct in my body told me to stay away. I needed to see his face. I needed to understand how a person could do something like this and still walk around freely. The entire drive felt suffocating. My father gripped the steering wheel so hard his knuckles were white, and my mother stared straight ahead like she was afraid that if she turned her head even slightly, she would fall apart again. When we arrived, nothing about his house looked like the lair of someone who had destroyed a family. The lawn was trimmed, the porch clean, the American flag hanging neatly by the door. That image alone made me sick. Inside, the confrontation exploded instantly. My parents unleashed everything they had been holding in, years of trust collapsing into raw fury. My mother screamed until her voice cracked, and my father's words came out sharp and relentless. They accused him of everything he deserved to be accused of, laying out the damage he had caused, the sickness of what he had done, the child now growing as proof of his actions. And he did not care. That was the part that still haunts me. He stood there, calm, almost bored, as if my parents were yelling about a broken fence instead of a crime. He denied nothing outright, but he also accepted nothing. He acted like it was an inconvenience, like this whole situation was an exaggeration that would pass if everyone would just calm down. He did not apologize. He did not look ashamed. He looked annoyed. That image burned itself into my memory because it told me everything I needed to know about the kind of person he really was. My father wanted to hit him. I could see it in the way his body tensed, in the way his breathing changed. My mother grabbed his arm, not to protect her brother, but to stop everything from spiraling into something irreversible. They left shaking, furious, and more determined than ever to make sure this did not disappear quietly. The next step came quickly. Lawyers were contacted, reports were filed. For the first time since the truth came out, it felt like something solid was happening. There was paperwork, appointments, official language that gave structure to the chaos. My parents were relentless. They wanted accountability. They wanted consequences. They wanted justice, not just for my sister, but for the version of our family that had been shattered beyond repair. Melissa, however, began to change. At first, she stayed silent. She barely left her room, spending hours lying on her side, one hand always resting over her stomach. I thought she was processing everything, that she needed time. But then she started asking questions that made my stomach turn. She wanted to know what would happen to him if the lawsuit moved forward. She wanted to know how prison worked. She wanted to know whether the baby would ever be able to see its father. Every question felt like a crack spreading across thin ice. When the legal process required her cooperation, everything collapsed. She told our parents she did not want to testify. She said it quietly, but the impact was explosive. She said she did not want to go to court, did not want to relive everything, did not want the baby to grow up knowing its father was in prison. She said that despite everything, he was still going to be a father, and she could not live with the idea of taking that away. She said she wanted to move forward, not backward. The case unraveled almost immediately after that. Without her testimony, without her willingness to stand in front of a judge and say what had been done to her, the lawsuit was dismissed. All that effort, all that rage, all that hope for consequences evaporated in a matter of days. The legal system did not collapse dramatically. It simply shut its doors and moved on. My parents were destroyed. My father could not understand it. He paced the house endlessly, replaying everything in his head, trying to make sense of how his own daughter could protect the man who had violated her. My mother cried in a way I had never heard before, deep and broken, like something inside her had been permanently damaged. She kept saying she had failed as a mother, failed to protect her children, failed to see what was happening under her own roof and during her own family gatherings. And then came the moment that shattered whatever hope was left. Melissa stood in front of them and defended him. She did not minimize what happened, but she reframed it in a way that made my skin crawl. She talked about stress, about confusion, about how things were complicated and not as simple as everyone wanted them to be. She said she did not want him punished. She said she wanted peace. She said she was thinking about the baby. I watched my parents' faces as she spoke, and I knew this was the moment something irreversible happened. Their anger drained away and was replaced by pure shock. Not the explosive kind, but the hollow, stunned silence of people realizing that the person they were trying to protect did not want to be protected in the way they imagined. They were not just shocked by what had been done to her anymore. They were shocked that she was standing up for the person who raped her, choosing him over justice, choosing him over herself, and leaving them powerless to do anything about it. Update 2. Watching my sister cling to the fantasy that everything would somehow turn out fine was one of the most painful things I have ever witnessed. After the lawsuit collapsed and the family split into quiet, hostile camps, Melissa retreated fully into her own world. She convinced herself that the worst was behind her, that what mattered now was the child growing inside her. She stopped seeing herself as a victim and started seeing herself as a future mother building something new. In her mind, that shift seemed to erase everything that came before. She believed that once the baby was born, reality would rearrange itself into something tolerable. She truly thought my mother's brother would step into the role of a father. That belief did not come from promises or responsibility on his part, but from her own desperation to give meaning to what had happened. She spoke about the future with a strange, fragile optimism, talking about stability, about how a child changes people, about how he would eventually come around once he saw his own blood. Every time she said things like that, I felt a knot tighten in my chest. I could see how deeply she was lying to herself, how badly she needed to believe that this story had an ending that did not involve complete abandonment. The rest of us watched helplessly. My parents tried to support her without encouraging the fantasy, which was nearly impossible. They helped with doctor appointments, baby supplies, and a nursery set up in the guest room. Outwardly, they did everything a loving family would do. Inwardly, they were bracing for impact. They knew exactly what kind of man he was, and they knew that people like him do not suddenly transform into devoted fathers just because a child exists. Melissa refused to hear any of it. She kept saying that once the baby arrived, everything would change. She treated pregnancy like a reset button for her entire life. When she went into labor, it was chaotic and exhausting. The hospital room was filled with tension instead of joy. The baby was born healthy, and for a brief moment, something softened in all of us. I remember holding that tiny hand and thinking that this innocent life had been dragged into something unimaginably cruel before it even took its first breath. Melissa cried, overwhelmed and emotional, convinced that this was the beginning of her redemption arc, the proof that her choices had led to something meaningful. And then reality arrived quietly and without mercy. Days passed, then weeks. My mother's brother never showed up. There were no visits, no calls, no acknowledgement beyond a few cold messages that became less frequent with time. Melissa brushed it off at first, telling herself he needed space, that he was processing everything. She told herself he would step up when things settled down. She waited. Eventually, the waiting turned into panic. When she finally confronted him, the illusion shattered completely. He made it clear that he was not interested in raising a child, not interested in being tied to her, and not interested in pretending to be something he never intended to be. He said he had his own life, and that this was not part of it. The baby was not a miracle to him. It was a problem he wanted nothing to do with. He disappeared almost immediately after that. He changed his number, moved, and cut off contact so cleanly it was like he had erased himself. There was no dramatic exit, no confrontation that gave closure. He simply vanished, leaving Melissa alone with a newborn, a ruined reputation, and the crushing weight of reality crashing down all at once. That was when my sister finally broke. The woman who once defended him, who refused to testify, who believed that becoming a father would somehow redeem him, collapsed under the truth she had refused to face. Her days became a cycle of exhaustion and disbelief. She stared at her child with love and terror mixed together, realizing that everything she had built her hope on had been a lie. The future she imagined no longer existed. Her career was gone, her social circle evaporated, and the family dynamic was permanently scarred. I watched her sit alone at night, holding the baby, tears streaming silently down her face, trying to understand how she had been so wrong. She had truly believed that protecting him would lead to something stable, something resembling a family. Instead, she was left with abandonment on top of trauma, and the horrifying realization that the man she defended never cared about her or the child at all. The final blow was not loud or dramatic. It was the quiet understanding that settled over her when she accepted that he was never coming back. She had expected many things after giving birth: exhaustion, fear, uncertainty, but she never expected to be completely discarded. And that realization hit her harder than anything else ever had, leaving her shocked, shattered, and utterly unprepared for the reality that my mother's brother had walked away without a second thought. Update 3. The ending of this story did not come quickly, and it did not come gently. It came in pieces, through exhaustion, anger, and a kind of unity that only forms after everything else has already burned down. After my mother's brother disappeared and left my sister alone with a newborn and a destroyed life, something shifted in all of us. The denial was gone. The excuses were gone. What remained was reality, raw and unavoidable, and for the first time since the truth came out, Melissa stopped trying to carry it alone. We stepped in fully. Not halfway, not carefully, but completely. My parents rearranged their lives around helping her. Nights blurred into early mornings filled with feedings, doctor visits, and long stretches of silence where no one knew what to say. I moved back home for a while, so she would not be alone during the days. We helped with the baby, with paperwork, with therapy appointments she barely had the energy to attend. Slowly, painfully, Melissa started to accept that the fantasy she had clung to was never real, and that protecting him had only protected his ability to disappear. The moment she agreed to take action again did not come with drama. It came quietly, after a long night when the baby would not stop crying, and Melissa finally broke down in a way that felt different from before. This time it was not shock or disbelief, it was clarity. She understood that her silence had cost her everything, and that continuing to stay quiet would only guarantee that nothing changed. She realized that if she did nothing, he would walk away untouched, and her child would grow up carrying the consequences alone. That was when she agreed to sue him. The process restarted, this time with her fully involved. Reports were reopened, evidence was gathered, timelines reconstructed. Family members who had once avoided eye contact were now lining up to testify. The same relatives who had been stunned into silence months earlier were ready to speak, to confirm patterns they had ignored, moments they had dismissed, behaviors they now saw clearly in hindsight. What once felt unthinkable inside a family circle became undeniable when laid out piece by piece. He was found. Not dramatically, not after a chase, but tracked down through paperwork, employment records, and the quiet persistence of people who refused to let him vanish again. Seeing him in custody was surreal. The man who had once stood calmly in his clean house, untouched by consequences, now looked small and irritated, still clinging to the belief that this would blow over like everything else had. The trial was brutal. Melissa had to sit through things no one should ever have to hear spoken aloud, especially about their own life. She shook, cried, and nearly walked out more than once, but she stayed. Every time she faltered, she looked at her child and kept going. My parents testified. I testified. Relatives testified. Even people who had once doubted the severity of the situation came forward, admitting how wrong they had been to ignore their instincts. He demanded to be released. He insisted he was innocent. He painted himself as misunderstood, framed, the victim of a family turning against him. But the room no longer belonged to him. His words carried no weight. The pattern was clear. The evidence was overwhelming. The people he thought would stay silent no longer did. No one believed him. When the verdict came back and he was sentenced to prison, the reaction was not relief in the way people expect. It was shock layered on top of grief. Shock that someone so close, someone trusted for so long, could do something so destructive. Shock that it had taken this much pain for the truth to be fully acknowledged. Shock that justice, while necessary, did not erase what had already been done. For Melissa, it was devastating in a different way. Watching the man she once defended be taken away was not empowering or satisfying. It was heartbreaking. It forced her to confront the full scope of what had happened without the cushion of denial. She grieved the version of herself who believed becoming a father would change him. She grieved the family she thought she could build out of something broken. And she grieved the years she would never get back. For the rest of us, it was a permanent fracture in how we viewed family. We learned that monsters do not always look like strangers. Sometimes they sit at your table, laugh at your jokes, and blend in so well that you doubt your own instincts. We learn that silence protects the wrong people, and we learn that doing the right thing does not feel heroic when it finally happens. It just feels heavy. The story ended with accountability, but not with closure. Melissa is rebuilding her life one exhausting day at a time, surrounded by people who refuse to abandon her the way he did. Our family will never be the same, but it is no longer pretending. And that, as painful as it is the closest thing to an ending we will ever get.